There is a man being carried through the streets of Florence, and the whole street has stopped to watch him pass. He is dead. He died 2 days ago, and now he is being borne on the shoulders of 6 men who knew him, lifted high so that everyone can see, moving slowly along the narrow way toward the church he chose for himself, years before he ever needed it. There are candles, there is the low sound of chanting, and on either side of him, men and women have come out of their houses and stopped what they were doing. Because in this city, in this year, a death is not a private thing. A death stops the street. Watch how it is done, because it matters. The bier moves at the pace of grief, not the pace of business. In front of it walk the priests, 4 of them, maybe 6, depending on the standing of the man inside the coffin. They carry the cross, they carry light. Behind the bier come the family, and behind the family come the neighbors, and behind the neighbors come ordinary citizens who may not have known the man at all but who join the procession anyway, because to walk behind a coffin is to say something. It is to say, this happened to one of us, and one of us is worth stopping for. You are not in the procession. You are standing slightly apart, in a doorway, with ink still on your fingers, because you are the man who sat at the dead man's table 3 days ago and wrote down his last wishes while he could still speak them. You are a notary. Your name is Tommaso. You are not yet 30 years old, and you have a small practice near the old market in the heart of the city. And your trade is the most ordinary thing in the world, and also, you will come to understand, one of the most important. You write down what people own, what they owe, and what they want to leave behind. You are the city's memory, set down in ink. On the table behind you, in your own house, there is a sheet of parchment that is not quite finished. It is the will of the man on the bier. He had named his heirs. He had set aside money for masses to be said for his soul. He had remembered a servant, a cousin, a daughter married into another quarter of the city. And then, partway through, he had grown too tired to continue, and you had folded the parchment and said you would return tomorrow to finish it, and you had meant it, and tomorrow he was dead. The will is complete enough, it will hold. But you keep thinking about the part he did not get to say. Hold this image in your mind, because everything that follows depends on it. A single man, dead, and a whole street stopping to honor him. Candles in daylight, priests walking ahead, neighbors falling in behind a coffin, out of nothing but the shared understanding that a death deserves witnesses. Remember it, because within 4 months, this same city will not stop for the dead. It will not light candles for them, it will not learn their names. It will carry them out of their houses and tip them into pits in the ground, hundreds at a time, and no one walking past will so much as slow their step. This is the thing almost no one tells you about the Black Death. We remember it for the bodies. We remember the swellings, the marks on the skin, the speed of it, the sheer arithmetic of the dead. And all of that is real, and all of that is coming. But the deepest horror of what happened to Florence in 1348 was not that half the city died. It was that, somewhere in the dying, the city lost the ability to mourn. The plague took the bodies, but first, before the bodies, it took the funerals. It took grief itself, and the people who survived had to learn, slowly and painfully, how to feel again. So you should know who is telling you this, because you are going to live this year through one pair of eyes. You are going to be Tommaso, the notary near the old market, in the parish of one of the central churches whose quiet green churchyard you have walked past 10,000 times and never once imagined as anything but a place of rest. You are going to keep your distance, as your trade allows you to, and you are going to survive, as not many do, and you are going to carry the cost of that survival for the rest of your life. You write the names of the dead for a living. Watch what happens when the names stop meaning anything. But that is the end of the story, and we are at the beginning. The man on the bier is one of the last in this city to be carried to his grave the old way, with candles and chanting and a street full of witnesses, though no one watching knows it yet. The plague is still only a rumor in the market, a story from somewhere far to the east. the kind of thing that happens to other cities. Florence, in the last winter before the plague, is the richest, proudest, most alive place in all of Italy. So let us step back, before the beer, before the pits, before any of it. Let us go back to the city as it was, on an ordinary morning, when the dead were still mourned. Begin again, earlier. It is a cold, clear morning in the last winter before the plague, and you are awake before the bells, lying in the dark in a narrow house near the old market, listening to the city assemble itself around you. You are Tommaso, the notary. Your house is tall and thin, 3 stories of stone and timber wedged between its neighbours, and you can hear all of them waking, a shutter thrown open above, a cart on the stones below, a dog, a child, a woman calling down to someone in the street. This is the sound of Florence stirring, and you have heard it every morning of your adult life, and you have never once thought to be grateful for it. Then the bells. They come from everywhere at once, from 100 churches across the city, ringing the first office of the day, and they do more than mark the hour. In a world with no clocks on the towers and no watch in any man's pocket, the bells are time itself. They tell you when to rise, when to pray, when to open the shutters of your workshop, when to eat, when to close. The whole city moves to them together. When the bells of Florence ring at dawn, 80,000 people, give or take, open their eyes in the same hour, and that shared rhythm is so deep in you that you no longer hear it as sound. You hear it as the shape of the day. You wash and you dress, and you eat standing up, because that is your habit. Bread, a little hard cheese, watered wine, because no one in this city drinks the plain water if they can help it. Your household is small. There is no wife yet. That is a thing you keep meaning to arrange and keep not arranging. There is a servant who keeps the house, and a young clerk who is learning the trade from you the way you once learned it from a man now dead of ordinary old age. You eat quickly because there is work, and there is always work, and the work is the thing that has made you, by the standards of most men in this city, comfortable, respected, and free. Now step outside, because you cannot understand what is coming until you understand what is here. Florence in this year is, by a wide margin, the richest city in Italy, and one of the richest in the whole of Christendom. Something close to 100,000 people live inside its walls, packed into a maze of stone towers and tile roofs along the green river that runs through the middle of it. A great new ring of walls, finished only a few years ago, encloses more ground than the city will fill again for 500 years, and rising above all of it, half-built, wrapped in scaffolding, is the enormous new cathedral the city is raising to itself, a statement in stone that Florence intends to last forever. What makes the city rich is wool, English wool mostly, shipped down from the cold northern island to the ports of Pisa and Genoa, carried inland to Florence, and turned here, by the hands of thousands of workers, into the finest cloth in Europe. There are more than 200 workshops in the wool trade alone. By some counts, a third of everyone in the city depends on it. The carders and the spinners and the weavers and the dyers and the fullers. An entire industrial machine running on sheep's wool and skilled hands. A bolt of cloth stamped with the Florentine seal is trusted from London to Krakow. The city has, in a sense, clothed half a continent and grown enormously wealthy doing it. And what the wool earns, the banks multiply. Florence is the banking capital of the world. Its great houses, the Bardi, the Peruzzi, and the others, have branches in every major city from England to the Levant, and they have done something genuinely new. They have made money itself into a kind of merchandise, lending to kings, financing trade across oceans they will never see, settling accounts with paper rather than gold. The city even mints its own coin, the florin, a small disc of pure gold so reliable that merchants 1,000 miles away trade in it by name. To hold a florin is to hold a piece of Florence's word, and the world has decided that word is good. You belong to all of this, more than you sometimes remember. You are a notary, and in Florence that is not a clerk's job, it is a station. The notaries and the judges together form one of the 7 great guilds, the Arti Maggiori, the small circle of trades that does not merely work in this city, but rules it. The bankers, the wool merchants, the cloth importers, the silk men, the physicians, the furriers, and you, the men of law and ink. From these guilds come the priors who govern the republic, chosen for short terms so that no one man can hold power too long. You are not a great man, but you are a man the great men need, and that is its own kind of power. Because consider what you actually do. When two merchants strike a bargain, you are the one who sets it down in a form the courts will honor. When a man buys a house, marries a daughter, frees a servant, founds a chapel, lends a sum, forgives a debt, it is your hand that makes it real, your signature that turns a spoken promise into a thing the law will defend. Without the notary, a bargain is only breath. With the notary, it becomes part of the permanent record of the city. You are, in the most literal sense, the keeper of what Florence remembers. Nothing is truly settled here until it is written, and you are the one who writes it. And the heart of all that writing, the document that matters more than any other, is the will. When a man of property feels his strength beginning to go, he sends for the notary, and the notary comes and sits at his bedside and takes down, slowly and carefully, exactly how he wishes the world to be arranged after he is gone. Who gets the house? Who gets the land? What is owed to whom, and what is forgiven? How much is set aside for masses to be sung for his soul, and for how long, and in which church? A man's will is the last shape he gives to his own life, and you are the one who holds the pen while he gives it. You have written hundreds of them. You have learned how to do it well, which is harder than it sounds. You have learned to be patient with a frightened, failing man. You have learned to read the room, to know when a pause is just weariness, and when it is something he cannot bring himself to say in front of his sons. You have learned to write a name with care, because to the man in the bed, it is not a name, it is his daughter, his brother, the servant who carried him to the window. You take this seriously. You have always taken it seriously. It will matter later that you were a man who took the writing of names seriously. Now walk with the city into its day. The streets near the old market are the loudest place you know. Every trade has its quarter and its sign, and every shop front has someone calling its wares into the crush of people. There are stalls of bread and stalls of fish, money changers behind their long benches with their scales and their stacks of foreign coin, butchers, shoemakers, sellers of candles and oil and spice. There are porters bent under loads, mules, the occasional fine horse, beggars at the corners, children darting between legs. The smell is everything at once: bread, smoke, animals, the river. It is filthy and it is glorious, and it is, above all, alive. But the city is not only its market, it is also its brotherhoods. Florence runs on more than guilds and banks. It runs on the confraternities, the religious companies that bind men together across the lines of trade and blood. Men gather in these companies to pray, to sing, to give to the poor, to walk in procession on the feast days carrying candles through the streets. And, crucially, they gather to bury one another. When a member dies, his company comes. They watch the body, they walk behind the bier, they pay for the candles, they see him into the ground with dignity. In this city, no man who belongs to anything dies alone. Hold on to that, because it is the thing the plague will take. Florence has built, over centuries, an entire machinery of mourning, and it is one of the finest things about it. A death here is a public event, a thing the city does together. The women of the household and the neighborhood gather to keen over the body. The men assemble in the street to receive it. The bier is lifted onto the shoulders of the dead man's equals. The priests walk before it with the cross and the candles, and the procession moves through the streets at the pace of grief. And people stop, and people join, and the dead man is carried to the church of his own choosing and laid in the ground with his name spoken over him. And over all of this presides the church, which is the one thing in Florence larger than the guilds. The bells you wake to are the church's bells. The calendar you live by is the church's calendar, its fasts and its feasts and its saints' days dividing the year. When you are born, the church names you. When you marry, the church binds you. When you die, the church, through its priests and its last rites and its promise of what comes after, is the thing that stands between you and the dark. The men of Florence are merchants to their fingertips, hard and worldly and sharp with a coin. But they are also, every one of them, afraid for their souls. And the church is where they take that fear. So look at the people you serve, because they are about to become the people you bury. There is the wool merchant whose contracts you draw, prosperous and anxious, and proud of his half-built family chapel. There is the widow running her dead husband's affairs with a shrewdness the guilds pretend not to notice. There is the dyer, the spice seller, the money changer, the old man with land in the country, and 3 sons who do not speak to one another. These are your clients. You know their business and their families and their quarrels. You know, in many cases, exactly what is in their wills, because you are the one who wrote them. They are the city, and you are its memory, and none of you knows yet what is coming. And so a death, in the Florence of this winter, looks like this. A man of some standing falls ill, and lingers, and sends for you, and you write his will, and then he dies, in his bed, with his family around him, and his confraternity comes, and the women keen, and the bier is lifted, and the candles are lit, and the street stops as he passes, and he is carried to his church and laid in the earth with prayers said over his named and individual soul. It is sad. It is also right. It is the city doing the thing a city is supposed to do, which is to mark the passing of one of its own. Remember exactly what it looks like. You will need it. This is the world, the richest city in Italy, raising a cathedral to its own permanence, running on wool and gold and ink and faith, governed by its merchants, bound by its brotherhoods, and certain, absolutely certain, that tomorrow will resemble today as today resembled yesterday, because it always has. You are a part of it, comfortable and respected and free, a keeper of its record, a writer of its names. You have your work, your standing, your guild, your quiet house near the market. You have every reason to believe your life will go on as it is. You are a man who has never once imagined a year like the one that is coming. But far away, in the east, beyond the edge of anything you have ever seen, something has already begun to move. It is travelling west along the same roads and the same sea lanes that bring you your English wool and your eastern spice, the great arteries of trade that have made your city rich. It moves slowly, at the pace of ships and caravans, but it does not stop, and it does not turn back, and it is coming toward you. And in the last weeks of this last ordinary winter, the first faint word of it is about to arrive, in the one place in Florence where all news arrives first, the market, just outside your door. It begins, for you, as talk in the market. That is how everything begins in Florence. The market is where the city learns what it knows. You are crossing it one grey morning in the last weeks of the old year, when you catch a fragment of conversation between 2 cloth merchants, the kind of men whose business reaches across the whole of the inland sea, and one of them is saying something about a sickness in the east. A terrible sickness, whole cities, he says. You do not stop. You have heard 1,000 market rumours, and most of them are smoke. You file it away and keep walking, and you think no more about it that day. But the merchants are the ones to listen to, because the merchants know the world. They are the men whose factors sit in distant ports, whose ships ride the same sea lanes that carry the news, whose letters arrive from Constantinople and the Black Sea and the edges of the map. And what their letters have begun to say, in the autumn of this year, is that something is loose in the east that no one has seen the like of, a pestilence moving through the trading cities of the Levant, killing not in scores but in thousands, emptying streets, outrunning every account of it. The men who trade with the East have heard, and they are uneasy, and uneasy merchants are worth more than calm ones. Here is what they have heard, pieced together from 12 letters and 100 conversations, the way news travelled in a world with no faster messenger than a ship. Somewhere far beyond the Eastern Sea, on the cold northern shore of the Black Sea, there is a Genoese trading post, a walled town where Italian merchants buy the goods that come overland out of Asia. And this town, the story goes, has been under siege, and inside it, among the besiegers and then among the besieged, a plague broke out so violent that it did what no army could, and the dying carried it home with them when they fled by sea. The detail that the story carries, the one that makes men lower their voices, is what the besieging army is said to have done at the end. That the attackers, dying themselves, used their great engines of war not to throw stones over the walls, but to throw their own plague dead, using the bodies of their own dead as weapons, casting them over the walls to carry the sickness to the people inside. Whether it is true exactly as told, you have no way to know, but the merchants believe the shape of it, and the shape of it is this: the sickness reached the ships, and the ships sailed home, and the ships are how everything reaches Florence. Because that is the part that should frighten you, if you were the kind of man to be frightened by a rumour, which you are not yet. The same Genoese galleys that carry the plague are the galleys that carry the trade. The roads it travels are your roads. The sea lanes it follows are the sea lanes that bring your city, its English wool, and its Eastern spice, and its endless flow of gold. Florence is rich precisely because it is connected to everything, tied by ship and road to every corner of the known world. And a thing that moves along the roads of trade will, sooner or later, arrive wherever the trade arrives, which is to say, here. By October of this year, the thing has crossed from rumour into fact, though the fact is still far away. 12 Genoese ships, fleeing west from the plague-struck east, put into the great port on the island of Sicily, at the southern tip of Italy, and within days of their landing, the people of that port city began to sicken and die. The sailors were driven out, blamed, banished. It was already too late. The sickness was ashore, and from the moment it touched Italian soil, it was no longer a story from the edge of the world. It was in your country, at the far end of it, but in it, and moving. The accounts that drift north from Sicily are almost too strange to credit, and you half disbelieve them, even as they make your skin cold. They say that in the stricken port, when the dying tried to do the ordinary things that dying men do, when they sent for someone to take their confession, to write their will, to ease their last hours, no one would come. The priests would not come, the physicians would not come, and the notaries, your own kind, the men of ink and law, would not come either. They had seen what happened to those who went near, and they stayed away, and the dying were left to arrange their souls alone. You read that detail twice. Men of your own trade, refusing the bedside, you do not yet know what you would do. And then it begins to climb. From Sicily the sickness spreads outward, by ship and by the flight of terrified people, to the islands, to the coasts, working its way up the peninsula toward the great cities of the north. In January it reaches Genoa itself, and Venice, the two greatest sea powers in Italy, carried home on the very ships that first fled it. The merchants in your market fall quieter now. These are not distant places anymore. These are the cities they trade with every day, the cities whose names are written all through your contracts. When Genoa sickens, Florence feels the cold of it, because Genoa is one of the doors through which the world comes to you. Then Pisa. And Pisa is close. Pisa is the port that feeds your city, sitting on the river a few days' ride to the west, the great grain market that supplies Florence and Lucca and half of Tuscany. Early in the new year, Genoese galleys out of the east put in at Pisa, and the sailors went up to the marketplace, and the people who met them there began to die. From that marketplace the sickness ran inland along the roads, the same roads your wool travels, the same roads your letters travel. It is no longer in another country, it is in Tuscany. It is in your own corner of the world, and it is coming up the road toward you, at the pace of a walking man. You can feel the city's mood beginning to change, the way you can feel weather coming before the sky changes. People still go to the market, still strike their bargains, still bring you contracts to draw. But there is a new tightness underneath it. A man asks you, half joking, whether you have heard the talk from Pisa. A client mentions that his cousin in Lucca has written something troubling. The merchants whose Genoa ties have gone quiet, whose letters have stopped arriving, look at you across the table with a question in their faces they do not quite ask. Everyone has heard. No one wants to be the first to say what they are thinking, which is, what if it comes here? And against that rising unease, the city tells itself the thing that cities always tell themselves. It will not come here, or if it comes, it will be a small thing, the kind of sickness that passes through in a bad season and thins the poor and the weak and leaves the rest alone. Florence is strong. Florence is rich. Florence has its walls and its physicians and its God, who has surely not raised this city to the height of its glory only to strike it down. The wealthy quietly begin to think about their houses in the country, just in case. But most men do what most men do, in the face of a thing too large to hold. They keep working, and they hope, and they do not let themselves believe it. You are one of them. You have work, and the work does not stop for rumors. There are contracts to draw and bargains to witness, and the ordinary endless business of a city that has every intention of going on exactly as it always has. So you keep your head down and your pen moving, through the shortening days of winter and into the first uncertain warmth of spring. And then, in March, in the season when the city should be coming back to life, the thing that has been walking up the road from Pisa finally reaches the walls of Florence and walks in, and the first of your neighbours begins to die. The first one you hear of has a name. That is what you will remember, later, about the beginning, that at the beginning the dead still had names. A man in a parish not far from yours, a man you knew slightly, the way you know 100 men in a city this size, by face and trade and the church he attends. He was well on a Monday, they say, and by the end of the week he was dead, and between the two there was something so swift and so strange that the whole quarter is talking about it. You hear the name in the market, the way you hear everything, and this time you do stop walking, because this is not Pisa, this is here. And then there is another, and within days it is no longer one name passed in the market, but a thing happening all over the city at once, in this parish and that one, by the river and up the hill, among the poor first, and then not only the poor. The thing has come up the road from Pisa exactly as the merchants feared it would, and it has walked through the gates of Florence, and it is here now, in the streets you have walked all your life, and there is no more pretending it is somewhere else. The pestilence is in the city. It is March, and the city is dying, and almost no one yet understands how completely. Let me tell you what it looks like, plainly, because the people of Florence are seeing it now with their own eyes, and there is no looking away from it. It begins, often, with a swelling, a hard swelling rising at the groin or beneath the arm, sometimes at the neck, and it grows quickly until it can no longer be hidden. The people have a name for these swellings already. They call them gavoccioli. And once the gavocciolo appears, the thing is almost always decided. There may be fever, there may be none, but the swelling is a sentence, and the city learns very quickly how to read it. Then, in many, the marks come, dark blotches spreading under the skin, on the arm, on the thigh, anywhere. Sometimes a few large ones, sometimes a scatter of small ones, livid and black. And these, like the swellings, are a sign that the end is near, that there will be no recovery, that the body has been claimed. A person watches these marks appear on their own skin, or on the skin of someone they love, and they understand exactly what the marks mean, because by now everyone does. There is no mystery in it. There is only the speed, and the certainty, and the helplessness of watching. And it is fast. That is the thing the accounts keep returning to, the thing that breaks the mind a little. A person well in the morning can be dead within days. Most who show the signs are gone within 3 days of the first swelling, some sooner. There is no long decline, no slow fading in which a family gathers and prepares. and says what must be said. There is a man at his work, and then there is a man in his bed, and then there is a corpse, and the distance between the three is measured in hours. The plague does not give Florence time. That, more than anything, is what it takes first: time. And no one can stop it, because no one understands it. The physicians of Florence are learned men, trained in the great schools, masters of the only medicine their world possesses. They believe sickness comes from an imbalance in the body, from a corruption of its humours, the four fluids that are supposed to be held in balance for a man to be well. So they do what their learning tells them. They bleed the sick to draw off the bad blood. They prescribe special diets, herbs, purges. They reason carefully from principles that are entirely wrong, and the sick die anyway, exactly as fast as if nothing had been done at all. It is worse than useless in a way, because it strips the dying of even the comfort of expertise. The people of Florence are accustomed to believing that a learned man with years of study can do something, that knowledge is a kind of shield, and they watch that belief fail. They watch the physician arrive with his instruments and his Latin and his confidence, and they watch the patient die regardless. And they understand that the shield is made of paper. The physicians themselves understand it. Many of them, seeing the patient is doomed and the risk to themselves enormous, simply stop coming. And who is left to fill the gap? A crowd of pretenders, men and women with no training at all, who call themselves healers because the real ones have fled or fallen, and who know even less than nothing. And here is the thing no one can grasp, the thing that makes the sickness feel like something out of scripture. It spreads by nearness. People can see, plainly, that to go near the sick is to catch it. To sit with a dying man, to handle his bedding, even to touch a thing he has touched, seems to carry the death from him to you. They tell a story in the city that the rags of a dead pauper were thrown into the street, and two pigs came and worried at them with their snouts, and within moments both animals sickened and were dead. Whether it happened exactly so does not matter. What matters is that everyone believes it, and what everyone believes is that love itself has become dangerous. To go to the people you care for is to risk dying with them. For you, the change arrives the way change always arrives in your life, through the work, through the parchment on your table. A week ago you were drawing contracts, the ordinary commerce of an ordinary city, a sale here, a partnership there, a marriage settled between two good families. And now, almost overnight, no one wants a contract, they want a will. The messages that come to your door have changed their character entirely. Come quickly, come today, come while he can still speak. Your trade has not slowed. If anything, it has never been busier, but it has turned, all at once, from the business of the living to the business of the dying. And your ledger, that quiet record of the city's affairs, becomes something else in your hands. It becomes the first instrument of the catastrophe, the place where the dying is written down. You begin to keep a kind of count without meaning to, simply because every entry now is a will, and every will is a person who will shortly be dead. You can feel the shape of the thing through your own work, the way a man standing on a bridge can feel the river rising against the piers. You are not a physician. You cannot see the bodies the way they do, but you can see the wills stacking up, and the wills tell you everything. The first client you lose, you feel. He is a wool merchant, a man you have served for years, whose contracts you have drawn and whose chapel you watched him build. You go to him when the message comes, and you sit at his bedside, and the gavocciolo is there at his throat, dark and swollen, and you can see in his face that he knows. You take down his will. He is calm, mostly, and careful, naming his heirs, remembering his servants, setting aside money for the masses. And you write it all down, every name, with the care you have always given it. And 3 days later he is dead, and you feel it, sharp and particular, the loss of one man you knew. You will think about that, later, that you felt it, that the death of that one merchant landed in you like a real thing, a grief with edges, a man-shaped hole in the world. You did not know, sitting at his bedside writing his will, that this would become remarkable, that the day would come not far off, when a death would land in you as nothing at all. But in March, at the beginning, you are still a man who grieves the people he buries, and you have no reason to imagine being anything else. The merchant dies, and you mourn him, and you go to the next bedside and the next. And around you, the machinery of the city begins, very slightly, to strain. The bells, which ring for the dead, are ringing more often now, more than you are used to, so that the sound of them is becoming a kind of weather. The parish churchyards, the green and orderly places where Florence has always laid its dead, are filling faster than they were built to fill. Not overwhelmed, not yet, but filling. A gravedigger works a little harder, a little longer. A priest performs a little more quickly than he once did. The old machinery still turns, but you can hear it begin to labor if you listen. And the people change toward one another. Fear is getting into the way they speak, the way they stand, the distance they keep. A neighbor who would once have stopped to talk now nods and hurries on. A man eyes the stranger beside him in the market, wondering. The easy closeness of a crowded city, the brushing together of thousands of lives that is the whole texture of Florence, is beginning to feel like a hazard, because it is one. Everyone has heard that nearness kills, and so everyone, without quite deciding to, begins to pull back from everyone else, and the warm, dense fabric of the city starts, thread by thread, to come loose. And the ones who can leave begin to leave. The wealthy, who have houses in the country, who have the means to simply remove themselves from the dying city, start packing what they can carry and going. You see the carts in the streets, loaded with chests and furniture, heading for the gates. You do not entirely blame them. To flee early and far is the one strategy that anyone can see actually works, and a man with a country estate would be a fool not to use it. But every cart that leaves takes something with it, a family, a household, a piece of the city, and the Florence that remains is a little emptier each day and a little more frightened. But you do not leave. You have no country estate to flee to, and you have work, more work than you have ever had, the grim, endless work of writing down the last wishes of the dying. So you stay and you go from bedside to bedside through the lengthening spring days, taking down will after will, name after name, watching the gavocchioli at the throats of men you have known for years. You are still, in these early weeks, a man doing his duty in a city under strain. You do not yet understand that the strain is only the beginning, that what has happened so far is nothing, that the city has not yet truly begun to fall, but it is about to. The descent is about to steepen, and you are about to watch the machinery of mourning, the thing that makes Florence Florence, start to break apart in your hands. At first it is one death at a time, and you can still hold each one, a name, a face, a bedside, a will. But somewhere in the lengthening days of spring the arithmetic changes, and it stops being one at a time. It becomes households. You go to write a will for a man, and by the time you arrive, his wife is sick too, and his servant, and by the time he is buried, 2 of the others are dying, and you understand that the plague no longer takes a person, it takes a house. It gets in through a door, and it does not leave until there is no one behind that door for it to take. And there are a great many doors in Florence. The first house where everyone is dead, you do not forget. You go to it because a message came, days ago now, a summons to write a will, and you were busy, and you came when you could. And when you reach it, the door is open and the house is silent in a way that houses are not supposed to be silent. And you understand, before you cross the threshold, that you are too late, that there is no one here to write a will for, that the whole household, the man and his wife and his children, and whoever served them, is gone. An entire small world, extinguished behind one unremarkable door, and no one had even come to tell you it was over. And you learn the smell. This is the thing the chronicles are too decent to dwell on, and the thing the living cannot escape. In a city where the dead are no longer carried out fast enough, where households die behind closed doors with no one left to raise the alarm, the first sign that a house has fallen is often the smell that begins to come from it. The neighbors know what it means, you know what it means. It means that somewhere inside, the plague has finished its work, and no one has yet come to do anything about what it left. The smell moves through the streets of Florence now, and the city has learned, with a kind of horror, exactly how to read it. And the funerals begin to thin. This is the change you feel most keenly, because you are a man who knows what a Florentine funeral is supposed to be. You remember the bier on the shoulders of the dead man's equals, the candles, the chanting priests, the neighbors falling in behind, the street stopping to honor one of its own. And now you watch it shrink. Fewer come. The crowd that should walk behind the bier is a handful, then almost no one, because the rest are sick or dead or too afraid to be near a corpse. The machinery of mourning, the thing Florence has perfected over centuries, is beginning, quietly, to fail. And into the gap step the bikini. You see them now in the streets, a thing you had never seen before this spring. Men whose entire trade is the carrying of the dead. Where the family used to come, where the confraternity used to come, where the neighbors used to lift the bier, now there are these men, and they do it for money. They are called bikini, and the name is not kind. They appear when there is no one else, when the household is too sick or too few or too frightened to carry its own dead. And they take the body, and they take a fee, and a city that once buried its dead with love begins, instead, to buy the service from strangers. And you should know who these men are, because it tells you something about what is happening to the city. They are drawn from the very bottom, the poorest of the poor, the beggars and the landless, and the men who could find no work in better times and had nothing left to lose. In an ordinary year, Florence would not have let such men near the body of a respectable citizen. But this is not an ordinary year. These are the only men willing to do the work, because the work is a death sentence, and only men with nothing to lose will take a death sentence for a fee. So the dead of Florence, rich and poor alike, pass now through the hands of the city's most desperate. The name they are given says everything. Bikini. Beccamorti. It comes from the word for the way a bird tears at a carcass, the pecking of a vulture at carrion, and that is how the city sees them, as vultures, as scavengers grown fat on the dead. And there is something to it, because they do grow rich, some of them, on the catastrophe. They charge what the desperate will pay, and the desperate will pay anything, and a few of these men of the gutter end the season wealthier than they ever dreamed, if they live, which most of them do not. They handle the dead all day. They die like everyone who handles the dead. But while they live, they profit, and the city hates them for it. And they carry tools that you would rather not look at. To draw the dead out of the houses, out of the beds where they fell, the bikini use hooks, long implements for reaching and dragging, because a man will not put his bare hands on a plague corpse if he can help it, not even a man who carries them for a living. So the dead of Florence, who a season ago would have been washed by loving hands and dressed and laid out with care, are now hooked and hauled from their houses by strangers with iron, and there is no tenderness in it anywhere, only the grim mechanical necessity of getting the body out of the house and into the ground before it kills anyone else. And then you see it, the thing the whole story has been moving toward, though you do not know that yet. You are called to a dying client, a man of some standing, the kind of man who, in any other year, would have had the full right, the procession, the candles, the crowd. And you write his will, and he dies, and you watch what happens to him. 4 bikini come. They shoulder a plain bier. In front walks not a company of priests, but a single tonsured clerk carrying the cross. There are a candle or two, or perhaps none, and they carry him, with hurried steps, not to the church he chose, the church he named to you in his will, but to whichever one is nearest. And it is the same rite, that is what undoes you, if you let yourself see it. It is the same act, a man carried to his church to be buried, the exact thing you watched at the very beginning, the bier and the cross and the candles and the priest. But everything that made it mean something has been stripped out of it. The candles are 2, not a glow of them, because the city has run so short of wax, that an order has gone out forbidding more. The priest does not linger over the words. He hurries through them and turns to the next. The body goes not to the chosen church, but the closest one, into the first empty tomb that can be found. The form remains, the soul of it is gone. And the priests, the ones who are left, cannot keep up, and so the city begins to silence even the bells. You have lived your whole life by the bells of Florence, the bells that ring the dead to their rest. And through the spring they have rung so constantly, so without pause, that the sound has become a kind of madness hanging over the city. And so an order is passed. No more tolling for the dead. The death knell is forbidden, not out of disrespect, but out of mercy, because the endless ringing terrifies the sick in their beds and breaks the nerve of the healthy in the streets. So Florence falls quieter, in the worst possible way. The bells that marked each death go silent, because there are too many deaths to mark. And one by one the other sounds go too. The order goes out to stop the criers who used to announce a death through the streets. The benches that were set out before the houses of the dead, the public mark of a passing, are forbidden because they have become unbearable and because there were never enough of them anyway. The whole visible, audible apparatus by which Florence used to declare that one of its own had died, the bells and the criers and the benches and the candles, is being switched off, piece by piece, in the space of a few weeks, because there is simply too much death for the city to keep announcing it. The dying becomes silent, the dying becomes invisible, and the city itself begins to close. Walk through Florence now, and the doors are shut. The workshops of the wool trade, the loud beating heart of the city's wealth, have gone quiet. The looms still, the dyers' vats cold. The guilds are not meeting, the taverns are shuttered. The markets that were the loudest places you knew have thinned to almost nothing. Of all the trades in the city, only two keep their doors open: the apothecaries, who sell the useless remedies the desperate still buy, and the churches, which sell nothing and are needed more than ever. Everything else has stopped. The richest city in Italy has, in the space of a season, simply ceased to do business. And the prices of the few things that still matter climb into madness. Wax, for candles, becomes almost unfindable, a pound of it worth more than a gold florin. The cloth that the dead were always dressed in, that cost a few florins for a woman's mourning gown, leaps tenfold, until the rich give up and bury their dead in plain stuff, and the poor are simply sewn into a sheet. The bikini charge a florin a man to carry a body, and there is nothing to do but pay. Everything to do with dying has become scarce and dear, because dying is the one thing Florence is now doing in enormous quantity, and the market, even now, even here, does what the market does. And the first time someone demands a fee over a corpse in front of you, something in you goes cold. You are a notary, money is your whole trade. But this is different. This is a man standing over a body, the body of someone who was loved, and naming his price before he will lift it, and refusing to move until the price is met. The dead have become a transaction. The carrying of a father to his grave has become a thing to be haggled over in the street, while he lies there waiting. You watch it happen, and you understand that some line has been crossed that the city may never fully step back across. And underneath all of it, every hour of every day, is your own fear. You are not made of stone. You go from bedside to bedside, into the houses where the plague is, and every time you cross a threshold you wonder if this is the one that kills you. But here is the thing you are beginning to notice about yourself. Your trade protects you, a little. You sit at the table, not on the bed. You take down words. You do not nurse the sick. You can keep a distance that the families cannot keep, the distance of a man doing a job. And that distance, you are coming to realize, may be the reason you are still alive when so many are not. You keep your distance, and you keep noticing that you keep it. And there is a guilt in that, faint at first, that you cannot quite put down, because the families cannot keep their distance. The wife sits on the bed and holds the dying man, and catches it, and dies. The mother cradles the sick child, and catches it, and dies. Love is killing them, exactly as the city feared, And you are surviving precisely because you do not love any of these people, because you are only the notary, because you sit at the table and write and then you leave. You are doing nothing wrong. You are doing your work, but you are watching people die of their own tenderness, while you live by the lack of it, and that knowledge settles into you and does not leave. And then, one day, it happens, so quietly you almost miss it. You write a death into your ledger, and you do not pause. A name goes down on the parchment, a person, someone who an hour ago was alive and frightened, and your hand sets it down and moves on to the next thing without a catch, without a wait, without the small inward stop that every death used to cost you. You notice it a moment later, the way you might notice a sound that has stopped. You felt nothing. You wrote a human being into the record of the dead, and you felt nothing at all. It is the first time. It will not be the last. The descent has found its true direction now, and it is not toward the grave. It is toward the silence inside you, where the grief used to be. There is a thing no one plans for, because no one has ever needed to, and it is this: a city only has so much consecrated ground. Florence buries its dead in the churchyards, the holy earth beside the parish churches, blessed for the purpose, with room enough for the ordinary dying of an ordinary year. And the dying of this year is not ordinary. The bodies come to the churches faster than the ground can take them, day and night, almost hour by hour, and the old way, a separate resting place for each soul, a marked and individual grave, simply cannot be kept. There is not enough holy ground in Florence to bury Florence, and so the city must do something it has never done. The churchyards fill. You can see it happening at the church near your own house, the quiet green place you have walked past 10,000 times and never truly looked at. The graves go in, one beside another, until there is no beside another left, until every foot of blessed earth holds a body, and still the dead keep coming, carried by the bikini, brought by frightened neighbours, left at the gate. The gravediggers cannot dig fast enough in the old way, one neat grave at a time, because the old way assumes there is time, and there is no time. The ground that was meant to last the parish for years is full in weeks. And so they make the decision that no one wanted to make. They dig trenches, not graves, trenches, long, wide, deep cuts in the earth of the churchyards, dug down, the chronicle says, to the waterline, as deep as the ground will allow, before the water comes up to meet the spade. They dig them across whatever open ground remains, and they dig them large, size to the parish, because the parish will need the room. These are not resting places for individuals, they are containers for a multitude. The city has stopped burying people and started, instead, disposing of bodies, and the trench is the shape that disposal takes. And the dead go into them by the hundred. This is the image the men who saw it could not get out of their minds, and reached for the same words to describe, because no ordinary words would do. As the bodies arrive, they are laid in the trench, hundreds at a time, and then, when the layer is complete, a little earth is thrown over them, just a little, a thin covering of soil. And then the next day's dead are laid on top, and a little more earth over them, and then the next, layer upon layer upon layer, the bodies and the thin earth between, down into the deep cut in the ground, until the trench will hold no more, and they must dig another. The men who witnessed it kept comparing it to cargo, to the way goods are stacked in the hold of a ship, packed in layers to fill the space, one tier and then another laid across it, nothing wasted, nothing spaced, the hold filled to its capacity with merchandise. That is the comparison the chronicles reach for, again and again, because that is what it looked like, and because the comparison carries its own horror, that the people of Florence, who were carried to their graves a season ago, on the shoulders of their equals with candles burning, are now stacked in the ground like bales of wool in a cargo hold. The dead have become freight, and the bikini come and go at the trenches day and night. The chronicle says the dead were often carried in the dark, in the night of the very day they died, hauled on a man's back to the ditch and thrown in, or else a high price paid to the bikini to do the throwing. The work goes on at all hours because it cannot stop. because the bodies do not stop, and there is something about the image of it in the darkness. The trench, the men with their loads, the thin earth, the next layer, that does not belong to any world you thought you lived in, but you do live in it. This is Florence now. This is what the holy ground has become. And then it is someone you knew, a client, a man whose will you wrote with your own hand, sitting at his bedside not long ago, taking down his careful wishes. He had named his church the way men do, the church where he wished to be buried, perhaps the church his family had always used, perhaps the one whose saint he loved, perhaps the one beside his family's chapel that he had paid to build. It was in the will. You wrote it down, the church where he wished to lie. And now he is dead, and you follow, because something in you needs to see where he goes. And he does not go to his church, he goes to the trench. The bikini who carry him do not make the journey to the church he named. They carry him, with their hurried steps, to whichever churchyard is nearest, and still has an open trench, and they lay him in it, among strangers, among the hundreds, with the thin earth waiting to cover him, and the next day's dead waiting to be laid on top of him. The thing he asked for, the one specific wish about his own death that he entrusted to you and the law, the church where he wished to rest, is not honoured. It cannot be honoured. There is no one left to honour it, and nowhere for it to mean anything. And he has no name there. That is the part you cannot get past, you of all men, you whose whole life is the writing of names. In the trench, he is not the wool merchant who built the chapel and remembered his servants in his will. He is a body in a layer, indistinguishable from the body above him and the body below, with no stone, no marker, no inscription, nothing to say who he was or that he was anyone at all. In a year, in 10 years, no one will be able to point to the earth and say, he is there. The man is gone, and the place that holds him cannot tell you his name, because the place that holds him holds 500 others exactly the same way. You stand at the edge of it, and you feel the gap open under you, because there are 2 records of this man now, and they do not match. There is the trench, where his body lies nameless among the hundreds, unmarked, unfindable, one anonymous form in the layered earth. And there is your parchment, back on your table, where his name is written in your careful hand, his wishes set down, his heirs named, his servants remembered, the whole shape of his life preserved in ink. The ground has forgotten him completely. Only the parchment remembers. And you begin to understand, standing there, what your trade has become. Because this is the thing you can still do, when nothing else can be done. You cannot save these people. The physicians cannot. The priests cannot. No one can. You cannot give them the funerals they should have had. The city has run out of candles and criers and bells and time. You cannot even make sure their bodies go to the right ground. But you can write their names. You can sit at the bedside and take down who they were and what they wanted, and you can keep that parchment safe, and in doing so you can hold on to the one thing the trench destroys, the fact that this was a person, with a name, who wished for things and loved people, and meant to leave something behind. So you keep writing. You write the death of the wool merchant into your record, his name, his date, his will witnessed and sealed, even as his body lies nameless in the layered earth across the city. And there is something defiant in it, and something almost unbearable, because the parchment and the pit are now 2 halves of the same man, and they tell completely opposite stories. The pit says, he was nobody, one of hundreds, freight in the ground. The parchment says, he was Giovanni, he was somebody, here is exactly who. And you are the only thing standing between those 2 stories, the thin line of ink that insists the pit is wrong. But you should be honest with yourself about what the parchment can and cannot do. It cannot bring him back, it cannot comfort him in the trench, it cannot undo the indignity of the layered earth or restore the church he asked for. The name on the parchment is not the man, it is only the memory of the man, a thing made of ink that will outlast the body but is not the body. You are not saving these people, you are recording them. And there are nights now when you wonder whether the recording means anything at all, whether a name in a ledger is a kind of dignity or only a kind of bookkeeping, a tally of the lost that helps no one but yourself. And the gap between the parchment and the pit goes on widening day after day as the trenches fill and your ledger fills alongside them, the two records of the same catastrophe growing in parallel, the nameless dead in the ground and the named dead in your book. You do not yet see where this is leading, what it will cost you to be the man who keeps writing the names while the city stops being able to feel them. But the strain is in you now, the strain of holding on to the meaning of each death while the world around you treats death as freight. And something has to give. The trenches are the city losing its ability to honor the dead. What is coming is you losing your ability to feel them. You are a man of the law, and so you feel this collapse before most people do, because it happens first to the things you know best. The Republic of Florence is run by its officials, its priors and its magistrates, and the small army of clerks and notaries and judges who keep the machinery turning, and the officials are dying. They die exactly as fast as everyone else, because the plague does not care what office a man holds, and as they die, the office is empty, and the work the offices did simply stops being done. The government of one of the great cities of the world is being hollowed out from the inside, one dead functionary at a time. And when the law dies, your whole world loses its footing. Because what is a notary, in the end, without the courts to honor what he writes? Your entire trade rests on the assumption that there is a system behind you, that a contract you draw will be enforced, that a will you witness will be executed, that the words you set down will be made real by the power of the Republic. And that system is failing. The courts cannot sit when the judges are dead. The records cannot be kept when the clerks are dying. A debt cannot be collected when both the man who owed it and the man who was owed are in the trench. The law, your law, is becoming words on parchment with nothing behind them. This is the thing you exist to maintain, and you are watching it dissolve. You have spent your life believing that what is written is what is settled, that the act of recording a thing in proper form makes it permanent and certain in a way that mere speech never could. It was the deepest faith of your profession and of your city. Nothing is truly real until it is written. And now the writing goes on, your hand still moving across the parchment, but the certainty behind it is gone. You can write a will, but you cannot promise it will be honored. You can record a death, but you cannot promise anyone will ever read the record. The ink is the same. The world that gave it meaning is coming apart. And the church, which is larger than the law, is failing too, and failing in a way that frightens people even more. The priests of Florence are dying, and they are dying faster than most, because their duty carries them straight into the path of the plague. A priest cannot refuse to attend the dying. His whole purpose is to be there at the end, to hear the last confession, to give the last rites, to stand between the dying soul and whatever comes after. So the priests go into the houses where the plague is, again and again, and the plague takes them, and the city begins to run short of the men whose job is to ease the passage of the dead. And so the unthinkable becomes necessary. With priests dying and the dying everywhere, there are not enough confessors to go around, not nearly enough, and a man may die with his sins unconfessed because there is no priest to hear him, and in the belief of the age that is a catastrophe for the soul greater than any plague. So the church bends. Word comes that in the extremity, where no priest can be found, the dying may confess to a layman, to another man, even, it is said in some places, to a woman, the most sacred function of the ordained priesthood, opened up out of sheer desperation. It is a small thing on paper and an earthquake underneath. The rules that have held for centuries are bending because there is no one left to keep them. And the deepest question of all begins to surface, the one no one can answer. If this plague is the judgment of God, as the priests say, as everyone half believes, then why does it take the priests? Why does it take the devout along with the wicked, the child along with the sinner, the nun in her convent and the monk at his prayers? Why do the processions and the prayers and the masses change nothing? the dying going on exactly the same whether a city begs heaven for mercy or not. People do not stop believing, mostly, but a crack opens in the belief, a doubt that will not fully close, the terrible suspicion that either God is not listening or the priests do not understand what he is saying. And some try to answer that doubt with their own bodies. You hear of them, and in time you may see them. The flagellants, men who have taken the judgment of God so completely to heart that they have set out to suffer in his place. They move from town to town in long processions, and they strip to the waist and they whip themselves, publicly, until the blood comes, scourging their own flesh in the belief that if they punish themselves hard enough, God may be satisfied and spare the rest. Even here in Florence, the city walks in penance. Great processions wind through the streets for days at a stretch, begging heaven for the mercy that does not come. And the flagellants believe it works, which is the saddest part. They believe that their suffering buys something, that the blood they spill holds back the death, and it does not. They die of the plague exactly like everyone else, scourged backs and all, and when they die despite their suffering, it does not weaken the belief, it sharpens it, drives it towards something darker, because if our suffering is not enough, the reasoning goes, then someone else's sin must be the cause, someone is poisoning the well of God's mercy, and that someone must be found. The penance curdles into a search for blame, and a frightened, suffering people goes looking for somebody to punish. And here the story turns to its ugliest chapter, and it must be told plainly and without flinching, because it is true and because it matters. Across Europe, in their terror, Christians turned on the Jews. The accusation was monstrous and absurd, that the Jews had caused the plague, that they had poisoned the wells, that this catastrophe was their doing. It was a lie. It was obviously a lie. The Jews were dying of the plague exactly like everyone else, dying in the same streets from the same disease. But terror does not reason, and a people desperate for someone to blame seized on the most vulnerable among them, and the result was slaughter. You should understand where this happened, because the geography of it tells you something. The worst of it was not here, in Italy. It was to the north, in the German lands along the Rhine, in the towns of the Empire and parts of France and Spain, that the killing reached its horror. Whole Jewish communities burned. In one city, 2,000 people murdered in a single day, and in many places the killing came before the plague even arrived, the mere rumour of approaching death enough to light the fire. The Pope himself condemned it, declared the accusation false, ordered it stopped. It did not stop. By the end, hundreds of communities had been destroyed, an entire people scapegoated for a disease that was killing them too. And you, in Florence, mostly hear of it rather than see it, and that distance is itself worth sitting with. Italy was spared the worst of this particular madness. The great massacres were a northern horror, carried out by people you will never meet, in cities you will never see. It would be easy, then, to think it had nothing to do with you, but it is the same disease of the spirit you have watched take your own city, only turned outward instead of inward, fear curdled into cruelty instead of numbness, the same terror that hollowed out your ability to feel, in other men, in other places, hollowed out their humanity entirely. You are not guilty of it, but you recognize the shape of it, and the recognition is not comfortable. And the failing reaches all the way into the family, into the smallest and strongest bond there is, and this you do see, every day, at the bedsides where you work. You watch it across the table as you write the wills, the son who will not enter the room where his father is dying, the brother who sends a servant rather than come himself, the wife who has fled, the husband who has gone, the family scattered to the wind by terror. The chroniclers wrote it down in words that have never lost their weight, that brother abandoned brother, that the husband left the wife and the wife the husband, that parents fled their own children. The plague broke the one thing everyone believed could not be broken. And you must try, even now, not to judge them too harshly, because the choice was real and it was terrible. To stay with the dying was, very often, to die. To sit on the bed and hold the sick child was to catch the thing that was killing it, and to leave your other children orphaned, and to die yourself for the sake of one who could not be saved anyway. So a parent stood in the doorway and could not make their feet cross it, and chose the living children over the dying one, and lived with that choice forever. It was not coldness, most of the time. It was an impossible arithmetic that no one should ever have to do, and the plague forced it on the whole city at once. And into the space where the family used to stand stepped the bikini for a price. This is what it has come to, that the carrying of a father to his grave, which was once the sacred duty of his sons, is now a service bought from strangers at the bottom of society, because the sons are dead, or fled, or too afraid. The men who handle the dead have taken the place of the family, and they have taken money for it, and there is something in that exchange that the whole order of the world is supposed to forbid. The dead are meant to be carried by those who loved them. Now they are carried by those who are paid. And the men of the church know that this is a kind of sin, even as it becomes unavoidable. To make a profit from burying the dead, to charge a fee for a thing that is meant to be an act of love and faith, breaks an old law of the church, which held that holy things must not be sold. The bikini are, by the strict reckoning of the faith, imperiling their own souls every day, selling the sacred and handling the plague dead, with no priest near and no last rites of their own to look forward to. But they do it anyway, for the gold, because they are the men with nothing left to lose, and the city lets them, because there is no one else. Everything that was sacred has a price now, and the price is rising. And so the city splits, under all this pressure, into two kinds of people, and you see both. There are those who turn to God with everything they have, who give away their possessions, and walk in the penitential processions, and pray without ceasing, and try, above all, to die in a state of grace, since they cannot avoid dying. And there are those who go the other way entirely, who decide that if death is coming for everyone, then nothing matters, and throw themselves into the taverns and the pleasures, eating and drinking and laughing at the whole catastrophe, living each day as though it were the last because it very well might be. The penitent and the reveller, praying and feasting at the end of the world, and you, the notary, move between them both, writing down the wishes of the dying, watching a city that has lost its law, its faith, and its families try to decide how to face the end, and feeling, you begin to notice, less and less as you go. You no longer read the names. That is how you know something has changed in you, though you cannot say exactly when it happened. There was a time, not long ago, when every name you wrote was a person, when your pen moved across the parchment and you felt the weight of each one, the daughter, the brother, the servant remembered in a dying man's last wishes. And now the names go down and they are only names, marks, shapes your hand makes out of long habit. You write Giovanni, you write Lucia, you write a death into the record, and the name passes through you and leaves no trace, like water over stone. And the deaths come in batches now, and you record them in batches, and that is part of it. In the beginning, each will was its own occasion, a man, a bedside, an afternoon. Now you go from house to house in a single morning, 3 wills, 4, the dying stacked up like the work itself, and you take them down one after another with an efficiency that would have horrified you a season ago. You have become fast, you have become good at this, at the rapid intake of last wishes, at the brisk witnessing of the end. And being good at it means feeling it less, because you cannot feel each one and still get to all of them. And so, without deciding to, you have stopped feeling each one. There is a bedside, one of these mornings, and you notice it there too, the absence where the feeling used to be. A man is dying in front of you, the gavocciolo dark at his throat, his breath coming wrong, and you are taking down his will, and you feel nothing for him, nothing. You note the details, you ask the necessary questions, you write his heirs and his bequests in your steady hand, and the man is afraid. You can see that he is afraid, and a season ago his fear would have reached into you and pulled something loose, and now it does not. You are doing your work beside a frightened, dying man, and you are as calm and empty as the parchment in front of you. And there is a funeral, if you can call it that, a body carried to a trench, and it does not move you. You watch the bikini lay another form into the layered earth. A person, someone who an hour ago had a name and a face, and you wait for the thing you used to feel, the small inward stop, the recognition that this was a life. And it does not come. You watch the earth go over the body the way you might watch a cart unload at the market, with mild attention and no grief at all. You search yourself for the feeling. It is not there. The place where it lived is quiet. And the bikini themselves, the vultures, the men you once recoiled from, have become simply part of the street to you. There was a time their presence was an obscenity, the hooks, the fees, the casual handling of the dead, and now you pass them at their work and you barely turn your head. They are furniture now. They are part of how Florence functions, like the apothecaries who stay open and the bells that no longer ring. The thing that horrified you in the spring is the ordinary texture of your days by summer, and you have stopped seeing it, the way you stopped reading the names, the way the eye stops seeing a thing it has seen too many times. And then comes the moment that the rest of your life will turn around, and it is so small that you almost walk straight past it, which is precisely the point. You are crossing the city on some errand, and there is a body in the street, not carried, not tended, just lying there where it fell or was left. One of the dead the bikini have not yet reached. And you walk past it. You do not stop, you do not slow. You register it the way you register a stone in the road, a thing to step around, and you keep walking, your mind already on the next thing, and you are most of the way down the street before any part of you registers what has just happened. And then you stop, not for the body is behind you now, but for yourself. Because something has reached you, late, the way a sound reaches you a moment after it is made, and the something is this. You walked past a dead person in the street, and you felt nothing, and you did not even notice that you felt nothing until now. You stand in the street, and you make yourself look back at it, the body, the person, and you wait for the horror. And what comes instead is a different horror, colder and deeper, the horror of realizing what you have become. The street did not stop for the dead anymore, and neither, it turns out, do you. This is what the plague has done to you, and it is worse, in its way, than what it has done to the bodies. The bodies it has only killed, you it has hollowed out. It has taken the man who wrote each name with care, the man who felt the death of the wool merchant like a real and particular loss, and it has worn that man down, death by death, will by will, trench by trench, until what is left is a hand that writes and an eye that does not weep. You did not lose your life to the plague. You lost something else, something you did not know could be lost, and you are only now, standing in the street, beginning to understand that it is gone. And you understand, finally, what the plague truly took first, before it took the half of Florence that lies in the trenches. It took the grief. The chroniclers who lived through this in the cities all around you wrote the same terrible sentence, in their own words again and again, that there was no one who wept for the dead, because everyone was waiting to be dead themselves. That is the real catastrophe, the one underneath the bodies. Not that so many died, that the living lost the ability to mourn them. The plague killed the people, and then it killed the mourning, and the killing of the mourning is the thing that turned a city of human beings into something else. And the guilt of it finds you now, where the grief used to be, because you have understood something else standing in this street. You survived. You are alive when so many are dead, and you are alive in large part because you kept your distance, because you sat at the table and not on the bed, because you did not hold the dying the way their families held them and caught their deaths. Your survival is bound up with your coldness. The very distance that kept you breathing is the distance that hollowed you out. You did not love them enough to die with them, and now you cannot even mourn them. You begin to wonder whether those two things were ever really separate. There is someone you lose in this stretch who should have broken through and does not, and that is the worst of it. Someone you knew well, someone who mattered to you once, gone like the others, into the earth, and you wait for it to land, this one, surely this one. a person you actually cared for, not a client, not a stranger, someone real to you. And it lands as the others land, which is to say it does not land at all. You note that they are dead. You feel the shape of where the grief should be, the outline of it, like the mark a picture leaves on a wall after it is taken down. But the grief itself does not come, and you stand in the silence where it should have been, appalled at your own emptiness. And you try. That is the thing you will hold on to later, that at least you tried. You try to feel it, deliberately, the way a man tries to remember a word that will not come. You make yourself think of who they were, what they meant, the times before all this. You reach for the grief on purpose, because you understand that a person who feels nothing for the death of someone they loved has lost something essential, and you do not want to have lost it. But it is like reaching for something in the dark and closing your hand on air. The feeling is not where you left it. You cannot weep on command. The plague has taken even that. And this is what it is, in the end, to live through the death of a city. Not the bodies, not the trenches, not even the fear, but this slow, quiet hollowing, this wearing away of the capacity to feel, until you stand in a street that no longer stops for its dead, and discover that you have become a street that no longer stops for its dead. The city forgot how to mourn. And you are the city, one man-sized piece of it, and you forgot too. The thing that made Florence Florence, that made it a place of processions and candles and neighbours stopping in the road, is gone, and it did not leave all at once. It left through 10,000 small surrenders, exactly like the one you just made, walking past a body without slowing your step. You stand in the street a while longer. Then you go on because there is nowhere to stand that the deaths are not. And there is more work, there is always more work, more wills, more names, more of the dying to take down in your steady, emptied hand. But you carry it with you now, the knowledge of what you have become. And it is a different kind of weight than grief. Heavier in some ways because it does not move, does not break, does not weep itself out. You have caught yourself in the silence where the mourning used to be. And though you do not know it yet, the catching is the first thing, the very first thing, that will one day let you find your way back. But that is far off, for now there is only the silence, and the work, and the long hollow summer, and the deaths that no longer reach you at all. It does not end the way you expect, with relief. It ends the way a fever ends, with a strange grey exhaustion, and a quiet that is somehow worse than the noise it replaces. Through the long summer, the dying begins to slow. Not all at once, but you notice it in your own work first, the way you noticed everything in your own work. The messages come less often, the wills stack up less quickly. There are mornings now with no summons at all. The plague that came up the road in March, that raged through the spring and the heat of the summer, is finally, by September, loosening its grip. It is not gone, but it is going. And the city it leaves behind hardly knows what to do with itself. And there is no rejoicing, because there is no one with the strength left to rejoice. You would think a city delivered from such a thing would pour into the streets in thanksgiving, and it does not. The survivors are too hollowed out, too stunned, too far past the end of their own feeling. They emerge from their houses blinking into a changed world, and what is in them is not joy, but a kind of grey disbelief. The numbness you found in yourself spread now across the whole city, a population that has watched half of itself die and has nothing left to feel about it. The dying has slowed, the mourning never came. There is only the quiet and the survivors standing in it. And the quiet is the thing that undoes you after everything. Because you know this city, you know what it is supposed to sound like, the roar of the market, the calling of the trades, the endless human noise of 80,000 lives pressed together. And it is gone. You walk through Florence in the early autumn, and it is half silent, the streets too empty, the noise too thin, like a great hall after the guests have left. The bells that were silenced for the dead have not all come back. The market, that was the loudest place you knew, is a fraction of itself. The city is still standing, but it sounds like a city with the life partly let out of it, which is exactly what it is. And the market shows you the arithmetic in a way the trenches never could. You go to it out of habit, and the stalls that are not there tell you more than any count of the dead. The faces you knew are missing. The fishwife, the seller of oil, the money changer at his bench, gone. Their places empty or taken by strangers. The crowd that should fill the square is a scattering. You can see, in the gaps, exactly how much of Florence is in the ground, because the market is where the city always gathered, and the city is not there to gather anymore. Half of it. You are looking at the absence of half of it. And the workshops stand silent, the looms still, and that silence has its own meaning. The wool trade was the beating engine of Florence. Thousands of hands at the carding and the spinning and the weaving. And now the workshops are quiet because the hands are dead. A master gone, his journeyman gone, his apprentices gone, the whole small world of a workshop extinguished, the loom standing exactly where he left it. The trade that clothed half of Europe has been gutted in a single season. It will come back, some of it, in time. But for now the looms are still, and the silence of them is the silence of a city's wealth, sitting idle, because there is no one left alive to work it. And then there is the count, because Florence is a city of records, and even now, especially now, it must know its losses. Word comes from the bishop and the lords of the city that an accounting is to be made, that the dead are to be numbered, and the count is taken as the autumn comes on. And the number, when it settles, is a number that the mind refuses at first to hold. More than half of everyone who stood in these streets in March is dead. You are a man who works in numbers, in sums and counts and careful reckonings, and this is a sum you cannot make ordinary no matter how you turn it. Half the city, gone between spring and autumn, and the bikini, suddenly, have nothing to do. The vultures who grew rich on the dead, who stalked the streets with their hooks and their fees, find their trade drying up as the dying slows. Some of them are dead themselves, of course, taken by the thing they handled all those months. But the ones who lived, the ones who survived to count their gold, find the bodies fewer now, the work thinning, the desperate season of their strange enrichment coming to an end. They drift back toward the bottom of the city they came from, a little richer, much hated, carrying whatever a man carries after a season of hauling the dead. The city will not forget what they did, or what it paid them to do. And the trenches are covered over, and grass will come, and that is its own kind of horror. The great cuts in the churchyards, the pits that swallowed the hundreds in their layers, are filled now, the last earth thrown over the last dead, the ground closed, and from above, in a season or two, you will not be able to tell. The grass will grow over them the way grass grows over anything. A man walking through the churchyard in a few years will see only green, only the quiet ground beside the church, and will have no way of knowing that beneath his feet lie hundreds upon hundreds of the nameless dead, stacked like cargo, unmarked, unfindable. The earth keeps its own counsel. Only the records remember, and the records are yours. And the survivors begin to tell themselves a story, and you can see why they need it. They were spared, they decide, by God. They lived because they were meant to live, because there was some grace on them, some purpose, some favor of heaven that passed over their door and took the neighbors instead. You understand the need for it. A man cannot live with the idea that he survived by pure chance while better people died for no reason, and so he reaches for meaning, for the comfort of having been chosen. But you, who watched the plague take the devout and the wicked exactly alike, who saw the priests die at their prayers, know how thin the comfort is. You were not chosen, you were only lucky, and you kept your distance. And the work that comes back to you first is the strangest work of all, because the dying has reshaped who owns the city. The widows come to you now, women whose husbands are in the trenches, who find themselves suddenly holding estates, businesses, properties, fortunes that the plague has funneled into their hands by killing every man who stood between them and the inheritance. And the heirs come, the unlikely heirs, the younger sons and the distant cousins who never expected to inherit anything and now inherit everything because everyone ahead of them is dead. Your will table, which all spring was a place of dying, becomes a place of strange and unlooked-for fortune, the wealth of the dead flowing into the hands of the living. And the houses full of goods with no master left to claim them are a thing the chronicles could hardly believe. All over Florence stand houses, good houses, full of furniture and plate and cloth and coin, where the entire household has died and no one is left to inherit, no heir to be found anywhere, the whole family extinguished. The survivors come back to look after their possessions and find the city dotted with these silent treasure houses, wealth without an owner, sitting behind unlocked doors. It is, the chronicler says, stupefying, and the law must sort it out, which means you must sort it out, the endless tangle of who owns what now that so many of the whos are dead. And so the first contract of the new world crosses your table, and it feels like writing in a language you have half forgotten. Not a will for once, a sale, a transfer, an ordinary piece of the city's business. The kind of thing you drew 100 times a season before the plague came. And it feels strange in your hand, almost obscene, this return to the commerce of the living, after a year of recording nothing but the dying. The world is starting again. Life is insisting on itself, the way it does. But you write the contract with the same hand that wrote 1,000 wills, and you carry into the new world the year that is now written, death by death, all through your ledger, and the silence inside you that has not yet learned how to lift. Now, at last, the number, because you have earned it and so has the city, and because a number means something different after you have watched it happen one death at a time. They reckon that more than half of Florence died. More than half of everyone who woke to the bells on that ordinary winter morning, who filled the market and worked the looms and walked the streets, is dead within the walls before the year is out. Not a distant statistic from a far-off place. The half of the people you knew. You do not have to imagine what that number means. You watched it arrive, will by will, name by name, all through the spring and the summer of the dying. And you should know what the figures actually are, because the truth is worth more than the legend, and the legend in this case undersells nothing. The most famous account, the one that rang across Europe, claimed 100,000 dead inside the walls of Florence, and that figure cannot be literally true, for a simple and terrible reason. There were not 100,000 people in Florence to begin with. The city held perhaps 110, 120,000 souls at its height. You cannot lose more than you had. The 100,000 is not a count, it is a cry, the sound a man makes when the loss is past all counting. The truer figure is its own kind of horror, and it comes from a man who lived it and kept the city's chronicle. 3 of every 5, he reckoned. 3 of every 5 people in Florence, dead, and the dry records bear him out, in their dry way, when the taxmen counted the households a few years later. Where there had been a great teeming city, there were now fewer than 10,000 hearths, a population cut from over 100,000 to perhaps 40 or 45. 60 out of every 100. Walk down a street in your mind, count off the doors, and strike out 3 of every 5. That is what happened to Florence. That is what you watched. And the disease took the city's name, which tells you how the rest of the world understood what had happened here. For a long time afterward, across Europe, men did not call it the Great Mortality or the Pestilence. They called it the Plague of Florence, as though Florence were not merely a place the plague had visited, but the very face of it, the city that had become a byword for the thing itself. Your proud, rich, golden city, the cradle of banking and the wonder of Italy, was remembered for a season as the capital of death. That is what the year did to the name of Florence. It made it a synonym for the end of the world. But a number is a wall you cannot see past, and you of all people know that the wall is made of individuals. So make the half real. It is the wool merchant whose chapel stands half built, and his wife, and his eldest son. It is the widow on the corner, and the man who kept the stall, and the priest who buried them both before he too went into the ground. It is the child with the embroidered blanket, and the apprentice 100 miles from home, and the old man with 3 sons who did not speak. Every unit of that number is a person you could have written a will for. with a name and a face and a church they hoped to be buried in. The half is not a half. It is 50,000 endings, each one entire. And there is a grief inside the number that even you cannot reach, because so many of the dead left no record at all. You wrote the wills of the men of property, the ones with estates to settle and the means to send for a notary. But the poor died too, in far greater numbers, and most of them died unwritten, unrecorded, untallied, hooked from their houses and tipped into the trenches without a name set down anywhere by anyone. Whole families gone, with no parchment to say they had ever existed. The count of more than half is itself an undercount of the sorrow, because it counts the dead but not the silence, the thousands who vanished without leaving even a name behind to be vanished. And do not imagine the countryside was spared, because it was not. It was, if anything, worse. Beyond the walls, in the villages and the farms and the open country, the same thing happened, only with no one to write any of it down. The chronicles tell of peasants dropping dead in their own fields, the harvest standing unreaped because there was no one left to reap it, the surviving few letting the animals loose and eating through the stores because they had lost all hope of living to need them. Villages that had stood for centuries were simply emptied, every soul in them dead or fled. The plague did not stop at the city gate. The city is only where the dying was written down. And the wound does not close in a year, or 10, or even in a lifetime. And this is the part the survivors cannot yet grasp. You think, perhaps, in the grey quiet of the autumn, that the city will fill again, that the gaps will close, that Florence will be Florence once more before too long. It will not. The population that the plague cut in half will not climb back to what it was for generations. Not for 100 years and more. Long after you are dead, the city will still be smaller than it was on that winter morning before the plague came. The half that died took with them the Florence that was, and that Florence does not return. A different one, eventually, grows in its place. And the strangest thing of all, the thing the survivors are only beginning to feel, is that the world the dead left behind belongs now to the living in a way it never did before. There are fewer hands, and so every hand is worth more. The labourer who could be replaced in an afternoon a year ago cannot be replaced at all now, and he knows it. The survivor who inherited 3 estates from dead relatives is rich beyond anything he expected. The whole settled order of the city, who was poor and who was rich, and who served whom, has been thrown into the air by the simple fact of so much death. And it has not yet come down, and when it comes down it will land in a different shape. The dead have made the living scarce, and scarcity is power. But that is for later, for the reckoning that history will make. Your reckoning, tonight, is simpler and heavier. It is the number you cannot write a will for. You have spent the year setting down the last wishes of the dying, one by one, giving each death its parchment, its name, its small permanence in ink, and there is no parchment large enough for this. There is no will you can draw for half a city, no document that can name 50,000 souls or honour them or hold them. The thing is too big for your trade, too big for the law, too big for the careful ink that was supposed to make sure no one died unrecorded. More than half of Florence is dead, and most of them you could not record, and you sit with that, the notary who could not write down the size of the loss, in the silence of a city counting its dead. The first thing the survivors notice, once the dying has stopped, is that work has changed its price. Before the plague, Florence was crowded with people and starved of nothing so little as hands. There was always another labourer, another servant, another pair of arms willing to work for whatever was offered, because there were more men than there was work to give them. And now, suddenly, there are not. Half the hands are in the ground. The man who would have begged for a day's wage a year ago now names his price, and the price is high, and there is no one to undercut him, because the someone who used to undercut him is dead. Labour, overnight, has become precious. And the men who survive find, to their own astonishment, that they have power they never dreamed of. The labourer, the servant, the craftsman who lived his whole life at the bottom, replaceable and powerless, discovers that he cannot be replaced, because there is no one to replace him with. He can demand more. He can refuse bad terms. He can leave a hard master and find a better one, because every master in the city is short of hands and competing for the few that remain. The accounts of the age complain of it bitterly, that the humble now turn up their noses at work, that they will scarcely serve their betters, except for double or triple the old wage. The world has tilted, and the people at the bottom feel it tilt in their favour, and the men at the top hate it and try to stop it, and cannot. The city passes laws, as cities all across Europe pass laws, ordering wages back down to what they were before the plague, forbidding the labourer to demand more, trying to freeze the world in its old shape by command. And the laws fail, almost everywhere they are tried, because you cannot legislate away a shortage. When a master needs hands and the hands are scarce, he pays what he must, law or no law, and quietly breaks the rule he himself voted for, because the alternative is to let his fields go unworked and his looms stand idle. The old order writes furious decrees against the new reality, and the new reality goes on regardless. And much of that new wealth flows through hands like yours, because the dead had to leave their fortunes somewhere, and it was the notaries who wrote down where. Think of all the wills you drew that terrible spring, all the estates you watched pass from the dead to the living, the fortunes of extinguished families flowing to a single surviving cousin, the widows left holding their husbands' entire wealth, the younger sons who inherited what 3 dead elder brothers would have taken. You were the instrument of it, the hand that made the transfer legal, and through your parchment a great churning redistribution of the city's wealth took place, the riches of the many dead pouring down into the fewer living, remaking who was rich and who was poor in Florence. And for a little while, strangely, the city is less unequal than it was, though no one would call it a blessing. So many have died, and so much wealth has been spread among the survivors, and labour has become so dear that the vast distance between the rich and the poor narrows for a generation before it widens again. The poor man's work is worth more, the rich man's rents are worth less. The old certainties of who stood where have been shaken loose. It will not last. In time the population will climb again, and the old inequalities will reassert themselves. But for now, in the wreckage, the survivors live in a more level city than their parents did, bought at a price no one would ever have chosen to pay. And the church never quite recovers the authority it lost, because people watched it fail. They prayed, and the plague came anyway. They walked in penance, and the plague came anyway. The priests, the holy men, the intercessors with heaven, died exactly like everyone else, and heaven did not seem to notice. People do not stop believing. If anything, their faith grows more fevered, more personal, more desperate. But the unquestioning trust in the institution, the certainty that the church stood between them and the dark, and could hold the dark back, that is cracked now, and it does not fully mend. A seed of doubt has been planted that will grow, over the long centuries, into challenges to the church that no one in your Florence could yet imagine. And then something remarkable happens, the kind of thing that only happens when a people has stared into the abyss. The city begins to right its own wound. A man you may have passed in the street, a Florentine who lived through this very year, sits down almost as soon as the plague has passed and begins to compose a great book, and he opens it with a description of the dying of Florence so vivid that men will read it for centuries to understand what happened here. He frames his 100 tales as the stories told by 10 young Florentines who flee the plague to a country villa and pass the days of horror by telling one another stories, because that is what people do at the end of the world. They tell stories. They make something. They insist on beauty in the teeth of death. And that, you begin to understand, is what survival actually looks like. Not forgetting, you cannot forget, not recovering, not all at once. But making. The 10 young storytellers in the villa are doing the same thing you do at your table, the same thing the masons will do when they go back to the half-built cathedral, the same thing the whole battered city will do as it picks itself up, insisting that life means something, by making something that lasts. The plague taught Florence that everything can be taken in a season, and the city's answer, slowly, is to build and write and paint as though permanence were possible anyway, defiantly, in full knowledge that it is not. And the civic confidence comes back, changed, harder and stranger than before. The Florence that emerges from the plague is not the innocent golden city of that last winter morning, certain that tomorrow would resemble today. It has seen tomorrow refuse to resemble today. It has buried half of itself in the trenches, but it does not lie down and die. It counts its dead, sorts out its tangled inheritances, gets the looms working again, fills its empty houses with new people drawn in from the countryside, and goes on, with a kind of hardness underneath the old beauty, the hardness of a city that knows now exactly how fragile it is and has decided to build anyway. And out of this battered, halved, defiant city, within the span of a few generations, comes something that will change the world. The Florence that survived the plague becomes, within 100 years, the cradle of a rebirth in art and learning and human ambition so great that we still live in its light. The city of the trenches becomes the city of the Renaissance. The same streets you walked writing wills for the dying will fill, in time, with painters and sculptors and thinkers, remaking the whole idea of what a human being is and can do. The survivors of the worst catastrophe in the history of the city become the ancestors of its greatest flowering. And here you must be careful, more careful than the easy version of the story wants you to be, because it is tempting to say that the plague caused the rebirth, that the catastrophe was somehow worth it, that good came of it in the end, and that is a lie, or at least a cruelty. The 50,000 dead of Florence did not die so that painters might flourish a century later. They did not consent to be the soil of anything. Their deaths were not a price paid for the Renaissance. They were simply deaths, each one a horror, each one a person who wanted to live, to tell their story as a happy accident, a darkness that cleared to let the light in, is to insult them. The good that came later does not redeem the loss. Nothing redeems the loss. What is true is harder, and you have lived it, so you can hold it. It is true that half of Florence died and it was an unredeemed horror, and it is also true that the survivors, out of that horror, built something new, because that is what the living do. They go on, they make, they insist on meaning in a world that has just shown them it has none to spare. The two truths sit side by side and neither cancels the other. The plague was not a blessing in disguise. It was a catastrophe, full stop. And the people who lived through it were not redeemed by what they built afterward. They were just brave, in the only way left to them, which was to keep going. You are one of them, and there is one thing left for you to do. Move forward now, years forward, past the worst of it, to a Tommaso grown older. The plague year is long behind you, though it never fully leaves. It sits in you the way a great wound sits in a body that has healed over it, present in the way you flinch at certain things, the smell of certain springs, the sound of too many bells. You are an older man now, in an older, rebuilt city. Florence filled itself again, slowly, with new people drawn in from the countryside, with children born to the survivors, with the ordinary insistence of life on continuing. You went on being a notary. You went on writing the names, and you carried the year with you the whole way. And the ledger from that year is still on your shelf. You kept it, of course you kept it. You keep everything. It is your trade. It sits among the others, that one volume, and you know exactly which one it is, without reading the spine, because it is heavier in your hand than any book has a right to be. Heavy with what is written in it. The year of the dying, set down in your own careful hand, will after will, name after name, all through the spring and summer when the city fell. You do not open it often, but you know it is there, and there are evenings, when the house is quiet, when you take it down, and you read the names you could not feel then. That is the strange gift of the years, and the strange penance of them. Sitting now in the quiet, an old man with his old ledger, you read the names you wrote in your numbness, The names that passed through you that summer leaving no mark, and now, at last, they land. The wool merchant, the widow, the man whose will you left half finished because he died in the night. You feel them now, one by one, the grief arriving years late but arriving, each name a person again, each person a loss. The feeling that the plague took from you in the dying has come back to you in the reading. You weep, finally, over names you could not weep for then. And you understand, reading them, what the parchment was for all along. You wondered, that terrible summer, whether the names you wrote meant anything, whether a record was a kind of dignity or only a kind of bookkeeping, and now you know. The parchment was the promise that the numbness would not be the end. It was the thing you did when you could not feel, so that one day, when you could feel again, there would be something to feel for. You could not mourn them then, so you recorded them, and the record waited, and it held their names safe through all the years of your emptiness, until the day you were ready to give them the grief you owed. Because there are 2 records of that year, you always knew that, and now you understand how they end. There is the pit where the bodies went, nameless, layered in the earth, the grass long grown over them, unfindable, forgotten by the ground itself. And there is the parchment where the names went, kept, held, waiting. The pit was the city forgetting. The parchment was you refusing to let it. And in the end the parchment won, not because it saved anyone, it saved no one, but because it remembered. And remembering, it turns out, is the one thing that can be done for the dead that the dead might actually want. They are still in the pit, but they are also still in the book, and the book is read. And so you find, as an old man, that you have come back from the place the plague took you. The hollowing was real. The year you walked past a body in the street and felt nothing was real. The silence where the grief used to be was real. And for a long time you feared it was permanent, that you had been turned into something that could no longer mourn. But it was not permanent. The feeling came back, slowly, over years, the way a frost-bitten limb comes back, painfully, with a deep ache, but back. You are a man who can grieve again. You did not know, in the worst of it, whether that man would ever return. He did. It only took the rest of your life. And the city came back too, the same way, and you watched it happen. The Florence that forgot how to mourn, that silenced its bells and stacked its dead like cargo, and walked past its corpses in the street, slowly, over years, remembered. It learned, again, how to bury its dead with care. The processions returned, the candles returned, the neighbours began once more to stop in the street when a bier passed, to fall in behind a coffin, to mark the passing of one of their own. The machinery of mourning, broken so completely in that one terrible season, was rebuilt, piece by people who needed it back. Because to be a city is, in part, to be a place that stops for its dead. And you remember the first funeral after the plague that was done the old way, in full, and what it did to you to see it. A man of some standing died, of ordinary causes, in the ordinary fullness of time, and his family sent for the priests, and there were candles, many candles, and the bier was lifted onto the shoulders of his equals, and the procession moved through the streets at the pace of grief, and people stopped and people joined, and you stood and watched it, an ordinary Florentine funeral, the most ordinary thing in the world, and you wept like a child, because you had seen what it looked like when this was gone, and here it was, come back. The city was mourning again. The city had relearned how to grieve. And that, you understand now, looking back across the whole of it, is the truest measure of what the plague was, and what survival meant. Not the count of the dead, terrible as it was, not the trenches or the bikini or the houses full of goods without a master. The truest measure was the grief, its loss and its return. The plague's deepest cruelty was that it took from the living the ability to mourn the dead, and the survivors' deepest victory, the thing that proved they were still human after all, was that they got it back. A city is not the buildings, it is not even the people, exactly. It is the choosing to feel, together, that one of us is worth stopping for. Lose that, and you have lost the city. Find it again, and the city lives. And you must be honest, even now, that the shadow never fully lifted, because the plague did not promise to stay away. It came back. Years after the great dying, it returned. Not as terrible as the first time, but terrible enough. And it came back again after that, and again, every decade or so for the rest of your life and long beyond it. You learned to live with that, as you learned to live with everything. But you never forgot that the thing which had once emptied the city was still out there, sleeping, and might wake again. And still, in the face of all of it, you went on writing the names with care, and you want anyone who finds your ledgers to understand why. Not because the writing changed anything. The dead stayed dead, the plague came back when it chose. The names in your book could not hold off a single fever. You wrote them with care because the care was the point. Because to set down a human being's name properly, fully, with their wishes and their loves recorded, was to insist that this person mattered, in a world that kept trying to prove that no one did. The plague said, "You are nothing, one body among thousands, freight for the trench." And your pen, every time, answered, "No, here is exactly who you were. This is the whole of it, the thing you would tell anyone who asked what it was like to live through the death of a city." It was not, in the end, a story about how many died, though so many died. It was a story about what the dying did to the living, about the slow hollowing of the heart under the weight of too much death, about the terrible day you walk past a body and feel nothing, and the worst moment when you realize it. And it was a story, too, about coming back, about the grief that returns years late, about a city and a man relearning, painfully, how to mourn. The plague took the bodies. It took the funerals first, but the funerals, in the end, came back. And so the catastrophe took its place in the long memory of Florence, carried by those who survived it to those who came after. You told it to younger men, the ones who had not been born yet when the plague came, and they could not fully grasp it, the way the young never can fully grasp the worst thing that happened before they arrived. But you told it anyway. You told them about the bells that rang until they were silenced, about the bikini and their hooks, about the trenches in the churchyards, about the year the city stopped stopping for its dead. You told them so they would know how fragile it all is, the whole human arrangement, and how precious, and how it can be taken in a single season. And what survives a catastrophe, in the end, is not the stone. The stone was always going to outlast you. The great cathedral was finished long after that plague year, its dome raised by men who were children when the city fell. And it stands, and it is beautiful, and it is not the point. What survives a catastrophe? The only thing that truly survives it is the choosing to rebuild, the choosing to fill the empty houses, to work the silent looms, to bury the next dead with candles even knowing the candles change nothing, the choosing to feel again after the feeling has been burned away. Florence survived not because its buildings stood, but because its people, having forgotten how to mourn, chose to remember. Return now, one last time, to where this all began, because you carry it still and always will. A man being carried through the streets of Florence, on the shoulders of 6 who knew him, with candles burning in the daylight, and priests walking before him, and a whole street stopping, falling silent, falling in behind, because in this city, a death is not a private thing. You stood in a doorway and watched it, with ink on your fingers, the will half finished on your table, and you did not know that you were watching one of the last of the old kind, or that you were about to watch the city lose this very thing, or that you would spend the rest of your life finding your way back to being able to feel it. And you stand again, in memory, at that dead man's table, the will finished now, finished long ago, witnessed and sealed and kept. You went back, in the end, in your mind, and you completed the part he could not say, gave him the whole of what he meant to leave behind, because that was the one thing you could still do for him across all the years. Make sure the record was complete. Make sure his name was written fully. Make sure that whatever the pit took, the parchment kept. The will is finished. The man is long in the ground, but his name is in your book, written with care. And you have read it, and you have wept for him. And that is not nothing. That is, in the end, everything you had to give. Because here is what you learned. The one thing, the thing worth carrying out of all that horror, that grief is not weakness. Grief is the proof that we are still human. The plague's victory was not the bodies. It was the moment it made the living stop grieving. And the survivors' victory was not that they lived. It was that they learned to grieve again. The morning that the plague killed was the first thing to die and the very last thing to return. And its return was the slow miracle that gave the city back its soul. To be able to weep for the dead is the whole of what separates a city from a charnel house. Florence forgot for one terrible season. And then, over the long years, it remembered. And one ordinary man saw it and recorded it and carried it. That is all you were in the end. Not a great man, not a prince or a prelate or a name history would remember. A notary near the old market, who happened to be standing where he could see it, who kept his distance and so survived, who wrote the names of the dying when he could not feel them and read them when at last he could. You were the city's memory, set down in ink, and the thing you remembered, above all the contracts and the bargains and the ordinary business of an ordinary life, was the year Florence died and the longer years in which it taught itself to live and to mourn again. So if you take one thing from this, from the whole long account of that terrible year and the man who lived it, let it be this: the city that forgot how to mourn remembered. That is the sentence the whole story comes down to. A great catastrophe can take everything: the people, the order, the faith, even the capacity to grieve the loss of all the rest. And still, in the survivors, in the slow work of years, the human thing comes back. The candles are lit again, the street stops again for its dead, the names are written and read and wept over. What was hollowed out is filled again, not quickly, not painlessly, but filled. The morning returns, and in its return, the city and the man are made whole. The ledger is open on your knees, in the quiet. An old man and an old book and a house full of evening. The names are there, all of them, in your careful hand. The year of the dying held safe in ink across all the years since. You have read them. You have felt them, finally, every one. And there is nothing left to do now but what you have always done, the one thing, the only thing, that was ever truly yours to give. You take up the pen, you make sure the record is complete, and then, gently, with the care you have given it your whole life long, you close the book.